Welcome to all of you to Second Saturday Conversation. Let me first say, I know that there were several quotes that we showed, and I think that they went a little quickly. And Jake, maybe there's a way that we can show those quotes again at the very end of our session. We have a couple of slides at the end when we have music playing, but maybe we can pull up the two long quotes from Marcus during that time as well, for those who didn't quite have a chance to absorb them. Okay, that would be great. So here at Second Saturday Conversation, we're exploring Christianity in and for the 21st century. And our overall theme for this year is evolution of the word, all things change. Evolution of the word, all things change. And we can have the word be a capital W. I mean, that's often how the Bible is referred to, as the capital W word. The capital W word is also referred to as the source of life. In the beginning was the word, so it's a reference to God. The word is also, we associate Jesus with the word made flesh. And so this year, we're going to explore how our understanding of God and the source of all that is, and even Jesus, and our use of language, how that is changing, and how that affects our faith and our understanding of what is real and possible. So a brief comment about the evolution of things. Christianity inherited a Greek understanding of reality that said that there's an ultimate pure form, and that is static, it's immutable, it's immovable, it's fixed, it's absolute, and that the eternal is changeless. It's beyond the world. It's a higher invisible dimension, that the ultimate, or that God is a higher invisible dimension. And when God interacts in our lives, it's sort of like he drops down from the sky, to put it very crassly. So, but what I think we also inherited with this Greek understanding is the separation between God and world, or the separation between God and matter even, or the separation between God and us. Now, in the Christian narrative, Jesus becomes the Word made flesh. So God becomes one of us. God is then, we start to think about God as being near and not far. And that, I think, is an important contribution of Christianity. But the classical theism suggests that there is a separation between us and God. And so there's a big emphasis on transcendence, on sort of getting beyond this world almost into another. And I think that transcendence, when we reach our own limits about how to talk about reality, we tend to let transcendence take the place of how we think, because we don't know how to think about this mystery in which we live and move and have our being. So transcendence, I think, is our default when we reach an impasse in knowing what we're talking about. So that's sort of the classical view of reality that we inherited, Christianity inherited. But we know now that nothing is static, that everything is energetic, that everything is dynamic, it's plastic, everything is interconnected, intraconnected. Change is always occurring. Even in states of equilibrium, those are temporary. And I draw that from physics and laws of thermodynamics. So change is always occurring, which means that things are always transformable, which also suggests there's always the possibility of novelty. And I think in our 21st century that is affecting how we think about God, and that God is nearer to us than we think. And the emphasis on transcendence is now being, I think, surpassed by the emphasis of immanence, that God is not so far. So as we explore on Second Saturday Conversations this year, we and talk about the evolution of the word and that all things change. Our understanding of the world is changing. Our world is changing. We are changing. And so how we talk about God also must change of necessity. Okay. My premise is that religions help us reshape our thinking about the contemporary world. So God, with this in mind, is a way of thinking about our relationship to the world. So, and that changes as our understanding changes. So tradition then cannot be static. It's not just about recouping and recovery, but it allows for more life to grow, and it acknowledges more complexity. So, how is Christianity helping us to think about our relationship to the world? If Christianity doesn't help us change in our relationship to the world, because the path that we've been on is we have to make changes. The planet's in peril, and actually so is humanity, and so is nature and the creatures of the earth. If Christianity then can't help us change our understanding and thinking about how to be in the world, then I'm not sure it's of much help to us. And if Christianity won't change its perspective and perceptions, then I don't think that it's any help to us. So thinking of the church for just a moment, I remember in a parish that I was in that somebody said, I would rather see Christianity die than change. So those of us who gather here on Second Saturday, I think that our claim is that something intrinsic to Christianity, deep within its heart, knows that change is needed, that change is occurring, that transformation is essential and possible, that in its depths, it knows that change is part of its, that it needs to respond to change and become part of it. And that the depths of our world, the depths of our life, and I would say the depths of Christianity, shake us and the world. And I say hallelujah to that. So, Jake, why don't you say a little to us about mics and muting them and how to raise your hand in the plenary session, which will come up in a little bit, and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jake. If you were here last month, you saw me here as well. Let's see. For raising hands during a plenary session, if you are on a desktop, you can find the raise hand option under the more section. It's across the bottom of the screen. There's a button that says, actually, wait, no, sorry. On desktop, it is under participants. There's a raise hand option. And if you are on mobile, say an iPad or an iPhone, that would be under more. And you can tap that, and that will show you as having your hand
Of
raised.
course you can. Yeah, go ahead.
And
And-
this is a good time to remind people about muting.
Yeah, Zoom has I have the mute upon entry checkbox checked, but it doesn't seem to be sticking for everyone. So
What? Of course you can.
Anyway, so it would be great if people muted their own computers, so that that would just be a good courtesy in it. And we can be mindful of that. So, and I hope that Jake's, because, you know, I'm pretty low tech, so I don't even know where to go to raise a hand. But I want folks to know today that Jeff Creswell, who Jeff and Carol, who usually help with the plenary session and keep their eye on the chat and often draw comments from the chat as part of the plenary, they're in Scotland. And they're actually at a conference called Storyline, which is interesting because we're sort of talking about Storyline today here too, in a different way. So when the plenary time comes, we won't be calling from, we don't have Jeff with us to help us with that. So what I encourage you to do is just to raise your hand if you have a question or comment, or even if there was something in the chat that caught you and you'd like to bring that to our attention, feel free to do that. And then Jake will call on you, and hopefully we can do this sort of in the order in which your hands go up, but we'll see how that goes. Does that sound about right, Jake?
that sounds about right to me.
Okay, sounds great. So I'm delighted that Jake is with us and helping us with the technical stuff. And as you all know, I couldn't do this without tech support. So I'm grateful for your presence and your skill at this. So let me now continue to talk a little bit about how the story of Jesus has changed over time. So this will be brief. And there were a couple of quotes from Mark's book. I think you can see this here. Jesus, Uncovering the Life, Teachings, and Relevance of a Religious Revolutionary. That's Jesus, okay? And I love the cover of this book. Okay, I think you can see this clearly. You can see this statue of Jesus and the scaffolding around it. And I think that this photo was taken of the Christ the Redeemer statue, which is in Rio de Janeiro. It was built between 1922 and 1931. It's 98 feet high, and that does not count the 26-foot pedestal that it's on. And Jesus' arms are outstretched, and I think that they're 92 feet wide. And what I love about this photo that's on the cover of this book, which Marx calls the Big Jesus book, is the scaffolding. Because I think we're in a time where we need to re-examine how our tradition and our understanding of Christianity is built, and how maybe it needs to be reformed, rebuilt, changed. So Marcus mentions in one of the quotes that we showed that Jesus has changed over the centuries, from Nazareth to Nicaea. By the way, that's the title of a book, From Nazareth to Nicaea, and then from Nicaea to how we understand Jesus today. The change is dramatic from the historical Jesus, and Marcus identifies the historical Jesus as the one who lived and moved and had his being in first century Galilee, and then the Christ of faith, which is the way that Jesus has been understood or interpreted or presented as time has gone on. And those two things, the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith, are very different. We don't know everything about the Jesus of history, but we know quite a lot. And Jesus didn't have a doctrine of God. I mean, he wasn't a theologian, but he did talk about his experience of God. He didn't talk in abstractions and concepts. He talked about the common things in life: mustard seeds, the lilies of the field, salt, sheep. And salt, by the way, it was is a metaphorical image, not a mineralogical one. And he asked people in his storytelling to either read between the lines or ask them, well, what do you think? What do you think is going on in the stories that I'm telling? And he was a storyteller par excellence. He was the master of the parable, which, to borrow from Emily Dickinson, we might say, tell the truth, but tell it slant. So his way of telling stories was actually very symbolic. It was imaginary. It was suggestive, okay? And so some consider that Jesus not as a theologian, but as a poet. Some think Jesus was a poet par excellence in his use and understanding of language and image, imagination, and how compelling that is for shaping a vision. Some say that his great poem was the kingdom of God. Okay. The kingdom of God was his vision of how the world could be. What was, oops, I am sorry about this. This is coming in on my computer, and I'm sorry about that. I don't know how to get rid of this. Shit. Jake, do you know how to find me again?
You should
Here I am.
be,
I
you should be
just- I just-
spotlighted, yes.
I just found myself. I'm so sorry about that, that call. Some suggest that Jesus' image of the kingdom of God was like his great poem. And as I said, it's not about what the kingdom is not a particular place. It's a way of being. It's a way of understanding. He suggested that there are other ways of being in relationship. And so it's suggested that Jesus' vision of the kingdom of God is actually a theopoetic vision, a suggestion of what would it be like if the last were first and the first were last? What if the rich were sent away empty and the meek inherited the earth? What about the outsiders being let in and the insiders not included? I mean, Jesus prompted this imagining of actually quite a topsy-turvy world. It was a bit inside out. And for the authorities of the day, it was very disquieting, uncomfortable, it unsettled and disturbed, which is just what Jesus' parables, incidentally, and his vision is intended to do, to sort of unhobble us from an inherited sense of logic about the way things are and the only way things can be. Jesus suggested things can be different. There are other things that are possible. We can think and imagine differently. And so that was part of his genius. So it's important for us to understand about the historical Jesus because the powers of the day, the domination system, executed him. So Jesus was killed for his vision, for disturbing the peace, if you will. And that's a really important thing to know about Jesus. Okay. But the stories about Jesus is perhaps the thing that we think most about. And those stories are the things that continue to call to us and move us and challenge us because they symbolize possibilities. His stories, I think today, even sees us on a visceral level. His stories touch our hearts and our hopes. So the vision of a different kind of world than what is possible, or now what we might think is impossible. But that vision is still alive. So to borrow languaging from someone else, the poet was killed, but the poem lives. And the reason that one of the many reasons these stories affect us is because of their symbolic power. They represent more than just what they're talking about. That's part of the power of a symbol. It represents more than a literal interpretation, for instance, okay? So as the understanding of, and by the way, as we all know, Jesus became the icon of empire. After Constantine, the whole understanding of church and what it means to be a Christian really changed. Where the Christian church had been persecuted, then it becomes actually a persecutor. Where Christians were pacifists, then they became soldiers. Where Christianity developed a theory of just war, which was a late development. Okay, so and Jesus became, in the telling of his story, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he became elevated to assume actually this image of the immutable, sovereign, all-powerful God. So, and then the stories too, as if we tend to literalize these stories, we take the spirit out of them, we actually take the power out of them, because the stories about Jesus are visual, imaginary invitations, okay? But however Jesus started to develop over history, he became an icon. The Christ of faith became an icon. And my question these days is, what kind of icon is he for us? What do we see in Jesus? What is happening in the name of Jesus? How is he functioning as an icon for us? Marcus says in one of the quotes that we showed that for Christians, that Jesus is the decisive revelation of what we can see of the character and nature of God. That Jesus is the decisive revelation of what we can know of God in human life. He is the intuition of what the divine is. So conversations about Jesus and what we think he represents and what kind of icon he is, what kind of, what he represents, it's an important conversation, certainly for Christians, and maybe for others as well. But I think in our day and age that we need to take time to think about what kind of icon is Jesus? What does he represent as a symbol of possibility or the depths of possibility? What matters most about Jesus? And if I return to my suggestion that religions help us think and reshape our thinking about how to live and move and have our being in the world, how is our understanding of Jesus as an icon, as a symbol for something, how is that helping us to do that? So the evolution of the word, all things change. Is that an icon for God? Narratives, as we know, can open up possibilities for us, and they can also prevent them. And I suggest that we need to allow for possibilities and for what the scriptures call new creation, which is not elsewhere. I suggest that if there is to be a new creation, it will unfold here. And I hope that in our respective communities that we do have a place where we can talk about this and explore this together and be part of the evolution of Christianity, as well as we are part of the evolution of the world and reality. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those things this morning. Much has been said about Jesus through the centuries. There's a lot of work and study about that. But I just wanted to note this morning that the notion of a fixed, immutable power, that no longer is the image of reality for us anymore. That if our symbols if we mistake them as representing a static reality, those symbols will shatter. Those symbols will no longer hold meaning for us if we understand them that way, because we know that that's really not how things are. So I think that we're in a really important and really exciting time in Christianity and actually all the world traditions to reimagine, rethink, wonder, and rather than thinking of God and world as something, two very separate realities, to recognize that, as Acts 17 says, that God is that in which we live and move and have our being. And that we know only in part. We always will only know in part. But to allow that to help us to change our perceptions and our understanding, and therefore how we act and celebrate and take responsibility for the world. So when we get to plenary time, I'm really curious to hear your comments about your own experience of how your understanding of Jesus has changed and of Christianity and where you are with that. So I want to take a few more minutes to say a little bit about some things in my own story. Stories, as we have talked about, are so formative. We are a storytelling species. We want to convey what's going on for us and what we think about and wonder and fear and hope. And we want to talk about that. And stories can definitely shape us, and for good or for ill. I also think that history shapes our stories. Like, how we understand the nature of reality, that is actually helping to shape our stories. And I think our stories can shape history. I think Jesus' vision of a kingdom of God, that things can be different, more just, more compassionate, more, our current economic understanding of more, bigger, better is absolutely, it's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. So if we can reimagine how to be in the world, that's absolutely essential. And our stories can help us move in that direction, or they can impede that. And I think Christianity is in kind of a pivotal place in terms of how is Christianity going to influence our participation in the world. So I'm going to mention a couple of experiences in my own life that I want to mention, because the ones that I'm picking out today about telling my story, I'm choosing to pick experiences that have really shattered my horizon of expectation. That's a phrase that I've been using that I borrow from Jack Caputo. But what experiences have shattered my own sense of possibility, or shattered my expectations, or that it's like, how can that be? Or how did that happen? Or I didn't know, or the stories, a couple of stories that I'm going to share, they shifted my sense of intuition. Something shifted me enough that it opened up other ways of intuiting and wondering and thinking, okay? And made me value my own existence, actually all existence, even more. So I know that, telling your story is very, we're encouraged to do that. That the first time I actually did that was when I made an application for seminary, and they said, tell us your story, tell us your spiritual story. And so I sort of pulled some threads from my life. But I think that what I did in that case was to try to either confirm or explain why this particular path was appropriate for me. I sort of made my case for my existence. And that's fine. But those aspects of my story is not what it catches me right now. I mean, there are many things about my story that I'm incredibly grateful for and that continue to shape me. One being that I was born outside this country. I wasn't brought up Christian. I traveled a lot as a kid. That is huge, a huge gift. I'm an adult child of alcoholics, hugely shaping, So there are a lot of things that go into my story and how I find myself here today. But in thinking about our stories, I encourage you to think in terms of what experiences kind of shattered your expectations of how things work, or that in which we live and move and have our being, gives us a slightly different view. So I'm going to just share a couple of experiences from my own life. One writ large is when I went on safari in South Africa. I'm incredibly privileged to have been able to have that experience. It was incredibly formative for me. Going into the bush in South Africa was actually more formative for me than going to Israel and the Holy Land. There was something about being in that environment that somehow it put me in touch with how deeply, deeply connected we all are: humans, animals, the ecosystem, ecology, politics, economies, how incredibly connected we are, and the consequences of all of that, each to each. So this wasn't from study, it was from just being in the experience of the bush and we did see the Big Five, and just having an encounter with the magnificence and diversity and particularity of and the mystery of being in the bush, and also the inextricable interplay of life and death. So there was something about being, and by the way, this was 1995 that I had this experience of making safari, and I wasn't really an outdoorsy person or anything like that. And so, going to the bush was just it. I don't really have words for it, but it shattered my horizon of experience and of a kind of insight that was more visceral than intellectual at the time. I mean, I ended up thinking more about it later. It definitely shook my heart, and it made it tremble. And I even had the audacity of thinking that to be eaten by a lion, what a way to go. I hope to God that is not how I go. But so there was something about being in the depths of a natural experience, and a wild one at that, that just opened up perception for me, and changed the way I started to see everything. The particular experience that I had in the bush that I want to share with you was holding a baby Inyala, which is an antelope, and an African antelope. And it had either been separated from its family, or they were killed, or whatever. But in the camp we were in, this baby Inyala came. And I ended up holding it the guide there said, that's all right. And I ended up holding it, and it fell asleep in my arms. And there was something about that put me in touch with what at the time I thought was sort of the eternity. And I could have been in that place forever. And being in that place with the Inyala was forever. I don't know how to articulate this. I should have thought this through a little bit more before I did this today, but there was something about holding this Inyala in my arms and feeling its heart against my heart and smelling its fur, its animalness, that just put me in touch with something about the incredible value of existence. And that it changed me. Okay. And I can't narrate how it has changed me particularly, but it still, in a sense, haunts me and blesses me. So there was something about that experience that was like nothing else I'd ever had. I also had an experience on a horse in the Wind River Range in Wyoming, where we were up at about 9,300 feet. I did not know how to ride a horse. There's a longer story to this, which I won't share here, but I ended up being on a horse and going up to this high, a 10-year-old boy said, "Oh, you've got to ride. You really should. I'll help you." So he kind of gave me some instructions, but we got to the top of this hill with a bunch of others. This was a trail ride. And then we came down with these switchbacks and these rocks rolling down into the steep cavern. And it was terrifying. And I didn't know what to do. And yet somehow I had to trust the horse. And somehow I did. And by the way, she was carrying a foal. So she was pregnant. So I sort of thought, well, she's going to take good care of herself. And I need to trust her in all ways. Well, it was a huge thing to trust this horse. And I had to trust it bodily, as well as emotionally and everything else. And I thought, and we made it down. And I remember thinking, what was that? What was that? What was happening there? Okay. And I remember at the time thinking that the horse was like an axis mundi, which is that image of the axis of the world between heaven and earth. Okay. But Marcia Eliade also says that the axis mundi suggests that anything. Oh my goodness. I'm going to turn this on. Okay. That's again, apologies for that. I thought my phone was off, and I think now it is. That the axis mundi also says that what is at the center of anything has a sacred quality to it. And what I said earlier about when we reach the limit of our understanding of what's going on, we tend to defer and say it's transcendence. And I think I did the same writing this, or it's like, oh, I feel like I've been in touch with something magnificent, and I gave it to the transcendent world. I don't see it that way anymore. I think what I experienced on the horse as well was something about the depths of experience and of life, and of an encounter with the depths. And so that experience also was for me bodily, it was emotional, it was not narrative in the way that I didn't have a narrative for it, but it has continued to unfold that experience for me and has shifted the way that I see things. So again, in telling my story, my habit would be to do it sort of more chronologically, and what this led to this and how it's brought me here today. But at my age, at this time in my life, at 71, the experiences that I'm reflecting on are the ones that have shattered my sense of expectation and possibility and actually opened me up to see this world in its dimensionality and multiplicity and interconnectedness in a way that I did not see before. And the way that I experienced the Inyala and the horse, and then the way I'm seeing the world as a result, it's so much more real for me. I mean, there's a part of reality that's just opened up. And it's here. It's in the depths of our existence. That's where, I mean, where we live and move and have our being. I think that's whatever God is, I think that's where God is. It's in how we live and move and have our being. Two other quick things I want to mention about things that have changed me. One was more conceptual. And this is fairly recent. This is maybe 15, maybe 20 years ago. But I had this powerful sense that Jesus, and I had even though I wasn't brought up in the church, and I was brought up in a foreign country, in Saudi Arabia, so the church was not a prominent feature at all. I had a very strong sense of Jesus from the time I was a little girl. And that's a whole nother story. But maybe 15, 20 years ago, I had this insight that Jesus had then, although I didn't have the language for it, and actually in many ways continues to function as an attachment figure for me. He was present. He saw me. I didn't have to perform. He was non-judgmental. I felt present because he was present. There was something in my experience of what of Jesus that was actually kind of unconditional. And I didn't have any of that in my parent-child relationship, or very little of it, okay? So somewhere in my psyche, I picked Jesus as my attachment figure. And that's, by the way, I don't mean this to sound reductionistic at all, but he functioned in that kind of healing way for me, and it worked. But that insight also helped me to see and reflect upon my own spiritual journey in a very different way, So again, that's just a suggestion of how, in this case, it was an insight. The other two had to do with nature, which was a little bit foreign to me. I was illiterate about the natural world. I mean, I was completely illiterate in the bush. and then I realized how much wisdom and awareness, and that there was so much going on that I knew nothing about. The insight about Jesus being an attachment figure also just sort of opened up my understanding of how Christianity has been a healing presence in my life. And then just one more that I'll mention is that Marcus's death, and again, I won't tell you that story, but Marcus's death 7 years ago is probably the most formative experience. I will say it's probably the most formative experience of my life. And it changed everything. It was a transformational experience, costly, incredibly costly. And there's been gift from it as well. So what I am sort of hinting at this morning is that our stories can hobble us to a familiar patch, or they can release us to a very different horizon. And the experiences that I just recounted with the horse and the Inyala, and even my insight about attachment figure and the death of Marcus, they made for me a break with logic, a break with a kind of logic that had sort of ordered my life. And that they exposed something else, and they exposed me in a different way that I think has made my life and made life even richer and fuller. And I no longer think in terms of the transcendent as much as I do the immanent. And that what is right in our midst is transformative. And it has beauty and danger and possibilities, and it's always changing. You know, Buddhism says that our suffering is our inability to accept impermanence. To accept impermanence. It's our inability to accept impermanence. That's suffering. And so there's something about the things that have happened in my life that have underscored impermanence and change, but that have also opened up a space where my existential trust is probably deeper than it's ever been, knowing full well that there are no guarantees for how things are going to turn out. So I'm sharing today a little bit of the evolution of my own thinking and wonderment. And I'm really curious to hear from you about what you think of the evolution of the word on many levels, what you think about all things change, what you think about how that entangles with our understanding of faith and God. How are we reflecting on all of this? And what difference is it making in terms of how we engage and participate, hope, dream, wonder, pray for this world and for the future that is yet to come? So let me just, let me be quiet for a moment. Just see sort of what comes up for you in response to my, the stammerings of my heart today. And in just a moment, I'll read the 10 guidelines, which are nice courtesies for how to listen and talk with one another. And then I'll open up this time for conversation with you. You can help me out to shed a little light on my own thoughts. And I'd love you to shed the light of your thoughts together. So a moment of quiet, and then I'll read the discernment guidelines. So take time to become settled in God's presence. Listen to others with your entire self, senses, feelings, intuition, imagination, rational faculties. Don't interrupt. Pause between speakers to absorb what's been said. Don't formulate what you want to say while somebody else is speaking. Speak for yourself only, expressing your own thoughts and feelings, referring to your own experiences. Avoid being hypothetical. Steer away from broad generalizations. Don't challenge what others say. These are difficult guidelines. Listen to the group as a whole, to those who have not spoken aloud, as well as to those who have. Generally leave space for anyone who may want to speak a first time before speaking a second time yourself. And I love this one, hold your desires and opinions, even your convictions, lightly. Even though they are sometimes so hard won, but hold them lightly. Okay. I think that I'm gonna go to a gallery mode here myself. if I can, maybe not. Anyway, I guess not. View. Here we go. Jake, can you help us by identifying some folks who may have their hands raised or want to make a comment or a reflection or kind of what this conversation today about our changing story, how it's striking you?
Yeah, looks like Michael Greco has his hand up. So
Great.
we'll
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
And I see Bill, and we'll get to you, or Jim. Hi, and Jim, we won't forget you, even though I see your real hand. So we'll make sure we get to you, Jim. Yes, Michael.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to add a comment that
Yeah.
within the Bible, we seem to have these strong images and metaphors of constant change and progress and evolution in the story of the Exodus. What is a journey except
Right.
continuing to leave one thing behind and to come to something else? And then, of course, even the death and resurrection. Death and resurrection is an image of change, of transformation. So it's so odd that these, the one is at the center of the Old Testament, the other at the center of the New Testament. And yet we still find a form of Christianity that's very reluctant to see change and progress as part of the story, part of what we should be about. It seems to me if we could just reconnect with those aspects of the tradition and realize that this is a journey, and it's not a matter of holding on to something from the past, but of moving forward to where we're supposed to be. It's a matter of dying to something old so we can rise into something new. That should be how we should be perhaps conceiving of our faith. And if we did conceive of that, we're clearly at a point, it seems to me, in our history of change and evolution, of moving forward on the next step of the journey. And we could be talking about what that step needs to be rather than arguing about whether there needs to be change at all in the first place.
Nicely put. I mean, I love what you said, and I love what you've recognized and identified in the biblical stories. And yes, isn't it curious that we tend to resist this idea of change, which is resisting the idea of transformation. So I love what you're saying, and I think I love the fact that you're saying what would be really important is, so now how do we understand ourselves and allow that new engagement, a more vital one. So Michael, thank you so much. I just really appreciate what you said.
and it looks like Valerie Ivy has her hand up.
Hi, Val. Make sure that you take your unmute yourself.
Yeah, I wish we'd got together years ago because there's some very similar things in our stories. What I want to say is about change and change in the church. And, I've been up on this hill here for 2.5 years or more on my own, which has been like a long retreat, like a hermit. And I've gone through a lot of thinking. And so I was sharing with my priest that I've gone back to basics. And a lot of the things, I got the book on the changing of the word, and going back to basics to me seems to be very different to somebody who's gone through seminary, because my priest said, oh, what a good idea. And her back to basics is doing another instructed Eucharist and telling people to when they can cross themselves and when they can do this and such.
When does it become the body and blood of Jesus, right? The epiclesis. When does that happen?
And so this is sort of frustrating for me. And on Zoom, I go to clergy meetings and hear clergy just saying, oh, I don't know what to do with my church. I can't bring them all back together again. And it's all this confusion going on out there somewhat. And it's very sad.
Yeah.
And I want to share that when I went out a couple of years after you did into the bush, and my life has been a lot with hospice and cancer problems and things like that, as you know. And when we went one day and an elephant had died, and we went back the following day, and when the elephant had died, it was just the body there, but there were animals waiting in silence around. And the following day we went back and there were elephants around the dead elephant, and they were mourning that elephant. I'll never forget this. And the other animals had waited before they ate the elephant for the mourning to take place.
Oh,
Isn't that an incredible thing? The
incredible.
connectedness. So
And
that even
the
sometimes,
wisdom in that, the compassion actually, and the wisdom in that.
yes, and even going against one's own innate, what's inbuilt inside you to wait, and with compassion, yes. So
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to say, and I'm really happy that you have this. And also one of the things going back was to read some of the books. I've gone back to the time in 1960 when I came across to the States, and I was recommended to read a book at that time, and it was Courage to Be.
Oh,
My local clergy had recommended that.
Paul Tillich.
So I just finished again, Paul Tillich. And I don't know how I ever understood it at 26, but here we are. I can hardly understand it now. It's a hard book. But I thought, why did somebody recommend that to me? And then I realized, going back, the confusion that I was in. I'd broken off a relationship. My dog had died. My boss was saying she was going to divide my job in half, and which part did I want? The confusion, and then coming across to the States. So going back to basics, and you really look at my life very differently, because I had forgotten all that confusion in starting again in America. So sometimes we need to go back to basics.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
thank you.
Oh, Val. Yeah. And you know, the poem I shared last time from William Stafford about there's a thread that runs through it. But
I
it's
love that.
hard to talk about the thread. People don't know what but there's a thread that runs through it, even as things are changing. And I love this, the Courage to Be. It's a classic, and
well, in reading
that's our
about
call.
Paul,
That's our call.
sorry, reading about Paul Tillich, I said they have compared Paul Tillich with Jack Caputo. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Tillich was a womanizer and Jack is not. So that's where they definitely do not. They
meant in their thinking.
But Jack will say that Tillich is actually one of his favorite theologians. So he draws deeply from Paul Tillich. And Courage to Be, as I said, I think that's part of our call. And for those of you, Val and I both served at Trinity Cathedral in Portland together. So that's how I met Val. And anyway, Val, we could talk.
Thank you. Anyway,
it's really lovely to see you. And I share with you that powerful effect of the bush and the wisdom in the bush, and that's innate in the animals. You know, for instance, a rhino, right, who's an herbivore, if he crosses a barren area, his bowels will automatically contract in hope that what he leaves might leave a seed behind. Okay. And now, I mean, how brilliant is that? You know, that's a kind of wisdom that, you know, it blew all my circuits. It opened up my whole sense of possibilities, you know, and wisdom. So anyway, you and I share that as a great gift. Anyway, bless you. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Jim, hi. Why don't we go to you next?
I wanted to bring you a quote that I found this last week, and I think it speaks to what you were speaking to today.
Good.
It's from Confucius.
Lovely.
And he says, "We have two lives, and the second begins when we realize we only have one."
Oh, just say that to us again. Jim.
We have two lives, and the second begins when we realize we only have one.
Right.
And I just thought that was the absolute, I had just found it this past week, and then here you come and with all of this change. I just wanted to say that I think the people have to get outside of the church to make a change. The church doesn't do anything to help you make a change. It's over and over and over and over the same thing. And I got tired of that when I was about 35 years old. I can hardly remember how long ago that was. But I was in a bookstore in Jackson, Mississippi, and I found a book that was titled Science of Mind. And I thought, well, that would be good because I have a great mind, I think. And so I pulled that book off the shelf and started reading it. And then I saw that it wasn't much about the mind, anything, except it was about a new way of thinking about reality.
Right.
And Ernest Holmes' book, Science of Mind, set me on a program, and I must have read 500 books,
Yeah.
including all of your husbands and all of Bishop Spong's, and on and on and on. And it has really changed me.
Right.
And one final thing, you talked about your experience in Africa, and I've been out there on the plains too. But my greatest connection came when I went to the Grand Canyon for the first time.
Yeah.
And I sat on the side of the Grand Canyon and just looked up and down that thing. And I just looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. And then I would get up and start to go away, and I'd realize I hadn't looked at it long enough. And I'd have to go back and sit and look at it some more. And I just felt connected to the world. Felt connected to the millions and billions of years that it took to make that thing.
Right.
And so the connection, the next day I went to the Media Crater out in Arizona and stood on the edge of the Media Crater and looked up and felt connected to the whole universe.
Wow. I understand.
But we start out with two lives, and the second one begins when we realize we only have one.
I think that's deep wisdom.
From Confucius, not from me.
and not from Jesus, but from Confucius. Well, that's deep. I mean, I think that's deep wisdom. And I think that kind of wisdom is deep in the structure of things. If that makes any sense, just that kind of understanding is deep in the structure of things. So thank you, Jim, so much. It's really good to see you. Okay. Jake, do you want to help us out?
Yeah. Let's see. Looks like Donna has her
Oh,
hand up.
is that Donna Acord?
It
Yep.
is.
Hello. Hi, where are you?
Outside with two other women from the women's retreat that we were at recently.
Great.
Um,
Yes. Good. Yes, Donna, help us out here.
well, I don't know about that, but I really appreciated you sharing those insights, because it kind of inspires me to want to, and I'm hoping my friends who are with me will want to do it together, to kind of look back at our own, what are the things that changed us along the way and changed our,
Right.
I don't even want to say thinking, but that would be a piece of it, but what was profound. But you also made me think about my time in Africa, which it seems like a lot of us have been there. So as you know, I was there for a couple of years. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the mid-90s, and people visited off and on, either me or other folks who were there, temporarily, like I was, and they would say how profound the experience was and how it touched their souls deeply. And I wondered a lot about that. Was it because it was like the cradle of civilization, or, because I felt that way when I left. I was so homesick for Africa. I had to go back within 6 months. I went back to do another job. And unfortunately, I had to leave after a short time because of terrorist attacks. The first strike from, well, anyway, I don't want to get into that, but anyway, it's always, I want to go back and think about that, but what you said about connection really resonates, because it was one of the things I learned early on and throughout my time there was that life is so, I mean, we think in our culture and in Western cultures that we can control so many things. We control our inside environment. We have air conditioning. We control, you know, we can put on clothes for rain or whatever. And we call people if, you know, we're going to be late or that kind of thing. None of that existed when I was there. And I saw that people had to live in the moment. I mean, I would go out, it took me a while to get it, you know, but like, oh, I said I was going to be there to teach this program. And, you know, it was raining. So it was so muddy that my bicycle tires would just load up with mud. So I could not, I mean, people couldn't. And I remember one time it was raining really hard and I was riding past this little market, of which there are many. And I stopped in to get shelter from, because I wasn't wearing rain clothes. And I stopped in to get shelter in one of the little booths. And one of the women, you know, of course, they welcomed me in. And she said, there was this saying that I heard a lot. It was all the time. And it was nothing to do, you know? And so we both said it simultaneously, you know, we're looking, it's pounding down rain. The little thing is leaking too, the little booth we're in, but you know, we could find a little space that wasn't. But people were a lot more connected that way too, helped each other, it just, I think there's something about the culture that was so in the moment, and the animals too. And just the one last thing, one of my favorite animals there was the marabou stork, which if any of you have seen one or seen cartoon images of them, you know, it's like as tall as I am a lot of times, and they'd mainly be standing on garbage heaps that, you know, in the nearest town. But, you know, they're part of the community. They do an important job. And
Yeah.
and they're goofy looking, you know, but I mean, so are we. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you for setting an example and starting me on this introspection.
Okay. Well, Donna, I mean, you're welcome. And I'm with you. There was something about getting in touch with the soul of the planet when I was in Africa. And I think for me, part of it was that we live under templates that organize our thinking and our patterns and some of our associations. My experience of being out in the bush was that the template was gone. And without that template that kind of put everything in its own kind of order, it's like then I experienced the world very differently. And there was a whole nother set of relationships and possibilities and that emerged and that was freed. So for me, you know, it's like, yes, our Western culture, for me, Western culture in particular, but it's a template and we put all of our data through that. And in the bush, it was like the template was gone. And for me, that sort of started to put me in touch with a soul level of something. Anyway, so anyway, I'm so glad that yes. Anyway, lovely. We'll continue our own reflective journeys. Thanks, Donna. Great to see you.
Okay, let's go to Susie D'Amico.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Susie.
When you started sharing your stories, there were a lot of things that I connected with, but what really popped out for me and kind of unstapled is the idea that suffering is the inability to accept impermanence,
Right.
and how we and
That's-
you're talking of the depths of experience, and my experience has been a lot of physical suffering from a congenital condition, and I could never understand what the point of it all has been. And you say, you know, Marcus's death for you was a break in logic. And I think I've spent my life trying to put my suffering into the template of logic, and I failed at it because it doesn't work. And the idea that I could take, I'm going to have another surgery, and the idea of dealing with that and the terror of it and the fear and the anxiety and putting it into the depths of experience and making it a transcendent experience right at this moment makes me feel like that is something that I will be able to do instead of being caught in the fear of it. And when I first understood that I was going to have this again, I was working with a hospice counselor, and we came up in just 3 days talking. My idea was that this experience is a voyage of discovery into the unknowable. But the knowable for me is nature. We have a hawk in the back of the house here that has been eating a bunny and is being harassed by magpies and crows. And it's the most extraordinary. In fact, there was an owl last night as well. I mean, this is just an energetic thing that's an experience that we've never been able to see before. And I think this idea of the immanent, all of what you just said at the end has given me a toehold on letting go and going with the flow of impermanence, and not feeling that. Up until today, I couldn't see past the surgery. Everything was blank. And now I feel like there's more beyond that experience that will be there. And whether that's in this physical world or a different reality. And so I'm very grateful and inspired by what you are putting forth here. I love the idea of the Axis Mundi being the center of the sacred. That's just, So thank you.
Yeah. We are journeying into the depths. Yeah. And
Okay,
for
let's
me, that's, you know, if we still can use the name God, for me, that's God. So.
all right, let's go to Sharon Sanderson.
Hi, good morning. So I had the privilege of traveling to the north of Scotland to an archaeological dig there called Scarrow Bray. And it's 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids. People lived there before Abraham left Ur. And it's above the tree line, so the houses were built into hills with stones as the support and the building material. And as I stood there, they're right at the edge of a massive cliff, that goes into the ocean. And I stood at the edge of the cliff, and I could feel the wind blowing. And I realized it's the same wind that they would have felt. And I saw the ocean below coming and going, and it would be the same water that they would have seen. And if I had been there at night, I would have been able to see the stars. And it would have been the same stars that they saw. And I really felt connected through time. And it was a very moving experience.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I love what I mean, and this is where I think that we do tend to then use a word like transcendent, but everything you've described was in the immediate physical experience of feeling the wind and hearing the ocean and seeing the stars and knowing that you're deeply, deeply part of all of that. Yeah. It does transport us imaginatively, but I think that we're part of all of that. The deep structure of all of that, we're part of that, I think. Anyway, it's lovely. Thank you.
And let's see, we're gonna go to Ellen.
And unmute yourself.
Go.
There you go.
Oh, hi, I'm Houston. My wife is Ellen.
Oh,
But
apologies.
I would like to say that we have learned and are learning about the Jesus way
Uh-huh.
through our encounters with those who exemplify love, care, trust, and truth seeking. And
Uh-huh.
as an example, I would like to lift up Andrew Basovich, who spoke a couple of times at Trinity Cathedral.
Mhm.
He and the organization he has recently formed are a peaceful voice in the wilderness of warmongering.
Hmm.
Andrew Basovich is living and practicing the Jesus way.
Wow. Great. I will look him up. I mean, obviously he's been at Trinity after I left, but thank you for that, Houston. And I'll make sure that I seek him out because he sounds like he's a wisdom teacher.
Well, he is, and he references Reinhold Niebuhr in his recent books, and did in his talks over at Trinity.
Great. Andrew Basovich. Okay, a voice of peace and
yeah. But there are many. This is a long line of people.
yeah. Oh, indeed.
And they keep this alive. They keep Jesus alive in this long line historical group of truth seekers.
Yes, yes, indeed. And sometimes we don't hear enough about that. You know, that's I will be so bold as to say that care, compassion, peacekeeping, truth seeking, that's the authentic lineage.
Your husband was part of that.
I think indeed he was. Yeah, he was. Thanks, Houston.
Okay, next we will go to George Furness.
Hello, I'm George's wife, Sandy, and I just briefly want to say that I'm grateful for all your insights about change and so many things today, and feel sad about adults being resistant to change, and perhaps even sadder about church being resistant to change, and feel hopeful because I get to spend time with a 2.5-year-old granddaughter on a regular basis who is just insatiable for learning and exuberant about learning and trying new things and experimenting, and just the joy of life in discovering new things. So that would be my story for today.
Yeah, lovely. Yes. Be like a little child. Isn't there something in scripture about that? Yeah, that's lovely, lovely. And I think that's innate, you know, that's innate in her. And then
And in us, we just unlearn it.
I think that's exactly right. It's like, you know, we've almost forgotten. But she'll remind you. It's lovely. Thank you. Okay, we still have time for a couple more.
Yep. We will go to Ruth Dyer.
Thank you. I just want to say how moving it was to hear you, talk about some sacred areas in your own life, and I think that in itself, I think somebody else's story that's moving sort of touches the movement of the spirit within our own selves, and so I think that's a real precious relationship when that happens. But I have a couple of questions. I was wondering, how can the church invite us to pay attention to more of those times, the church or any places of worship? Is there a way that we can incorporate that in some kind of worship service because that seems to be very meaningful. Not that doctrine and the other stuff doesn't have its place, I suppose, but for me, the experience, I think, speaks to all of us. It's like what you were saying before, that thread. And so if there is a time that we can call people to notice, to ponder, and then to trust each other to express, what they've seen, what they've heard, what they've felt, where they see the holy and the divine in their own lives, but have that be a place somewhere in the church. I know sometimes we do different retreats, and I think you mentioned a reflective journey. How can the church do reflective journeys in community? For me, I think that would be a lovely experience, to ask people each week, what touched your soul this past week? Where did you experience some soul renewal or some energy? Because I think that those times, those are the sacraments. I think that's that sacramental experience. And, our stories, there are God moments, for lack of a better word. There are the other, the more, whatever moments that we all share, instead of just, reciting the Our Father or saying a Hail Mary, or, they have their place, right? But who we are, and the other thing I was thinking about was, how can the church invite us to be our own poets? Can we be our own poets? Because I think that in a sense we are poets when we experience something, and we want to capture that and savor that, just to kind of write it down a little bit. How can the church help us to savor those moments and those connections? So, and I guess a little bit of it would maybe fall into spiritual direction or something like that, and reminds me of that. But I just wanted to say, I hope somehow, as the church changes, as it evolves, that it will include this as part of a worshiping experience. So again, thank you so much for what you said.
Ruth, you're welcome. Are you part of a community right now? Are you part of?
I'm sorry?
Are you part of a church?
Sort of.
Sort of. Okay.
I weave in it, but actually I am part of the community.
Okay, because the things that you just described about pulling, getting people together and have them reflect and trust their experience and reflect on that, and as prisms of the sacred and all of that, and the encouragement to, that maybe we're all poets, and to give voice to yourself. You could do that by if you talk to the pastor or whatever and say, I'd like to offer this on a adult education class or on a Saturday morning or whatever, and give it a try. We're a long way from incorporating that into worship, I think, but maybe not, but give it a try. You've articulated it so well. You could invite people to the very experience that you would like them to have. So consider that, and just maybe the courage to be right, and
Right.
just say, I'm going to try this in my own community and see how this happens. And by the way, let me just quickly say, and then we'll go to Ken. This month, October 15th, we're having a third Saturday, which is totally optional. But and I'll send out the a registration for that on Monday. But third Saturdays are invitations for people to be in small groups. And so, and some people are not comfortable with small groups, but on October 15th, from 9:30 to 11, for those who show up for that session, I'm going to put people in very small groups, probably just groups of 3, to do the very thing that you're talking about, to have them reflect on their own experience in terms of what has sort of shattered your horizon of experience, right? And to share things about your story in that context. And that's my invitation for next Saturday, on third Saturday. So, maybe if you come, you can see how that works, but take it with you and try it in your own communities. Because I like what you're suggesting a lot. Yeah, so thank you, Ruth. And then Ken, I think that you're going to be the last one, and then I'm going to do a brief close for this session. And then for those of you who can or want to, we have coffee time, which is sans coffee. but it's just a little extra time for us to greet one another. So Ken.
Well, I'll be brief, Mary Ann, and
Okay.
thank you for all of this. In the beginning, you repeatedly used the word shape.
Okay.
Shape. It's both a verb and a noun. And I think that focusing on that, your African experience, you were subject to being reshaped. The basics, because again, back to the basics, you have to be of, and I think we have to be of a material that can be reshaped. If you try to put a round peg in a square hole, it's the wrong shape unless it's made of clay. A clay can be reshaped, but if it's made of concrete or something not malleable, shaping won't work. So there has to be a material that can be reshaped.
I love it. And that's
back to you.
I think that's great. And for me, it's, matter matters. And it's in the matter that things are transformed, I think. And so and in terms of my own experience of what I've heard from some others, our experience of being shaped, it's very bodily. It's visceral. It touches our heart and it's visceral. So I like the movement that we're all going in, which is it's more about matter than about separation of matter and spirit. It's more about integration of spirit and matter. And I think that's a really important shift that we're going through. Immanence almost more than transcendence, or we need to redefine what we mean by transcendence. Anyway, thank you, Ken. Okay, well, let me couple things in closing. I mentioned that October 15th that we have an optional, all of this is by invitation, but a third Saturday, it'll be a small group invitation, and I'll send out to everybody, I'll send out a description and registration for that next week. Brian McLaren, who is a wonderful human being. He started out in a very conservative evangelical world and has broken gravity. So Brian McLaren has written a number of books. Can I Be Christian? Faith After Doubt. He will be our guest on the 12th of November. I said the 14th in our email. That was a mistake. It's the 12th. The second Saturday of November is November 12th. And that Brian McLaren will be our guest. I'll be sending a reminder to you about that. But I really look forward to Brian being with us. And I think that we'll learn a lot from his story too, about how he has changed and how his understanding of Christianity has changed. So I'm really delighted that he's willing to share his story with us. And just as a little plug, Jack Caputo has a new book out called Specters of God, An Anatomy of the Apophatic Imagination. I won't try to define any of that. I'm just now moving through it. As you know, Jack Caputo, next to Marcus Borg, has probably been the most influential theologian in my adult life. So I highly recommend that you take a look at that. And let's see. I guess that's all I need in terms of announcements. Okay, closing music. I know that we're just at 11 o'clock. So the closing music for today, it runs about 6 minutes, and it's from Van Morrison. As many of you know, Marcus and I courted to Van Morrison. So Van Morrison has a privileged place in my list of musicians. And I'm playing for you today a song that's called The Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone. And let me just read the first stanza for you. Out on the highways and the byways all alone, I'm still searching for my home. up in the morning, out on the road, and my head is aching and my hands are cold, and I'm looking for the silver lining in the clouds, and I'm searching for the Philosopher's Stone. Well, the Philosopher's Stone, as many of you know, was thought to be an alchemical substance capable of turning lead into gold, base metals into gold or silver. And it was also, the Philosopher's Stone was also called the elixir of life. It was also a symbol for enlightenment. And by the way, one of the songs that lead us into this time together is Van Morrison's Enlightenment. And I just love it. He says, I don't know what it is, but that doesn't mean we don't search for it, right? And the Philosopher's Stone, the search for the Philosopher's Stone is also called the Great Work. And I think that we're all involved in that great work, sort of searching for the Philosopher's Stone. And Van Morrison goes on to say, you know, it's a hard road. It's a hard road. My job is turning lead into gold. It's a hard road. And even my best friends don't know that that's my job. And I'm searching for the Philosopher's Stone. So I love this song. So you'll hear that as a background to our closing slides. And as I said, I think that we too are, as it were, searching for the Philosopher's Stone, for what is in the deep structure of things, which I think is change. But I also think it might have something to do with love, because I think that love has to exist for anything to exist. A closing reading, and we will post this as part of the closing slides. And by the way, since somebody mentioned about the unknowing or the non-knowing, I think it's the non-knowing that drives our search. So all of that is good. I'm going to read to you 2 paragraphs from a book by Kathleen Dean Moore called Wild Comfort, The Solace of Nature. Kathleen Moore is a philosopher. She was a colleague of Marcus's at Oregon State. She's an author. She's fabulous. She's a wonderful human being. And I decided to read a quote from her, since in my own experience, nature has been such a powerfully transforming dynamic and element in my life. And in some ways it came late, but you know, the material world and spirit is all entangled together as far as I'm concerned. And she writes, she suggests that we are in the time of the singing of the birds, which is a phrase borrowed from the Song of Songs in Scripture. And that this is the time where we reflect on our sacred obligation of care and celebration of the world. So this is from Kathleen Dean Moore. And because so many of us have been touched by the power of nature, I think this is an appropriate closing for us today. Here's what I believe, she says, that the natural world, the stuff of our lives, the world we plod through, hardly hearing, the world we burn and poke and stuff and conquer and irradiate, that this world, not another world or another plane, is irreplaceable, astonishing, contingent, eternal and changing, beautiful and fearsome, beyond human understanding, worthy of reverence and awe, worthy of celebration and protection. And what's more, if the natural world is sacred, and quote, sacred describes the natural world, if there are not 2 worlds but one, And it is magnificent and mysterious enough to shake us to the core. If this is so, then we, you and I, are called to live our lives gladly. We are called to live lives of gratitude, joy, and caring, profoundly moved by the bare fact that we live in the time of the singing of the birds. So here's to our lives in the singing, in the time of the singing of the birds. See you at coffee hour for those who can. See you November 12th with Brian McLaren. And for those who can stay for coffee hour, I'll see you in a few moments. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for sharing so much with us today.